The woman who saved a $2.3 billion company was making $11.60 an hour when she did it. And the man she saved didn't even know her name. I need you to sit with that for a second, because this story is going to make you angry, and then it's going to make you uncomfortable. And then, if I tell it right, it's going to rearrange something inside your chest that you didn't know was out of place. Let's start with the man. His name was Edward Kane, 61 years old, CEO and co-founder of Kane Meridian Technologies, a cybersecurity firm headquartered in a glass tower in downtown Chicago that employed 2,300 people across 9 countries and posted revenues of $1.7 billion the year the story takes place. Edward Kane was, by every metric that modern capitalism uses to measure a human being, a success. He was on lists. The kind of lists that come in magazines with glossy covers and advertisements for watches that cost more than houses. He'd been profiled in Forbes twice. He'd given a keynote at Davos. He'd shaken hands with 3 sitting presidents and had dinner with 2. His face was the kind of face that looked like it had been engineered for boardrooms. Square jaw, steel gray hair cropped close, eyes that were blue in the way that cold water is blue. Not inviting, just precise. He wore suits that cost $4,000 and shoes that cost $1,200 and a watch that cost, and I am not exaggerating, $87,000. The watch was a Patek Philippe. He'd bought it to celebrate the IPO. He said it was an investment. His ex-wife said it was a personality disorder you could tell time with. They'd been divorced for 6 years. She got the house in Lake Forest. He got the apartment in the Gold Coast. Neither of them got the part of each other that used to laugh at the same jokes. But that's a different story. Edward ran his company the way a surgeon runs an operating room, with absolute authority, total focus, and the unspoken understanding that everyone in the room existed to hand him the right instrument at the right time. He was brilliant, genuinely, indisputably brilliant. He co-developed the encryption protocol that Kane Meridian was built on, a piece of architecture so elegant that even his competitors admitted, grudgingly, that it was a work of art. He held 11 patents. He could read code the way a musician reads sheet music. Not just the notes, but the spaces between them, the rhythm, the intent. And he worked constantly, not the performative busyness of executives who fill calendars to feel important. Real work, deep, obsessive, 14-hour day, fall asleep at your desk work. His assistant, a long-suffering woman named Rachel, once told her husband that managing Edward's schedule was like managing weather. You couldn't control it, you could only prepare for it and hope it didn't destroy anything important. Edward was respected. He was feared. He was admired. He was, in the way that certain powerful men are, fundamentally alone. And he had one blind spot so large that an entire human being could stand inside it and be invisible. But we'll get to that. The woman. Her name was Gloria Moreno. She was 53. She had been cleaning the Kane Meridian building for 7 years when this story takes place. 7 years. 2,555 nights. Give or take. She worked the night shift, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., because the night shift paid $1.41 per hour, because the night shift meant she could be home in time to make breakfast for her grandson, who was 12 and whose mother, Gloria's daughter, was serving an 18-month sentence for a drug charge that Gloria did not discuss with anyone, ever, under any circumstances. The grandson's name was Marco. He was the reason Gloria got out of bed. He was the reason she ironed her uniform. He was the reason she took the bus 45 minutes each way because her car had died in February, and the repair estimate was $1,400, and $1,400 was a number that existed in a different universe than the one Gloria lived in. Gloria cleaned the entire 42nd floor of the Kane Meridian Tower every night, alone. The 42nd floor was the executive floor, the floor where the decisions were made, where the money moved, where the air itself seemed to cost more because the vents were quieter and the carpet was thicker and the art on the walls was real, not the mass-produced nonsense they hung in the lower floors. She vacuumed the conference rooms. She emptied the trash. She cleaned the restrooms, 3 of them, all marble, all with soap dispensers that held soap that smelled like eucalyptus and money. She wiped down desks, polished glass, replaced the liners and wastebaskets with fresh bags. She did this every night. The same rooms, the same desks, the same trash. And she did it well. Gloria did everything well. Not because she loved cleaning. She didn't, not particularly, no more than a carpenter loves sawdust. She did it well because she believed, deeply and without irony, that how you do anything is how you do everything. Her mother had told her that. Her mother, who had cleaned houses in El Paso for 31 years. Her mother, who could make a bathroom mirror so clean it looked like a hole in the wall. Her mother, who died with arthritic hands and a savings account of $6,000 and the unshakable dignity of a woman who had never once done anything halfway. Gloria inherited that dignity, along with the arthritis. She could feel it starting in her knuckles, a stiffness on cold mornings, a dull ache after wringing out the mop, a whisper from the future saying, "This body has an expiration date. You should probably start planning." But planning required money, and money required hours, and hours were all Gloria had to sell. So she sold as many as she could and tried not to think about what would be left when the stock ran out. I need to tell you about how these 2 people, Edward and Gloria, occupied the same building, the same floor, the same physical space for 7 years, and existed in completely separate dimensions. Edward arrived at the office every morning between 7:15 and 7:30. Gloria left every night at 2 a.m. Their paths crossed, on average, about once a month, usually on nights when Edward stayed late, which happened during product launches, board meetings, quarterly reviews, or whenever a crisis demanded his particular brand of focused intensity. On those nights, Gloria would arrive at 6, begin her routine, and at some point encounter Edward in a hallway, or a conference room, or the kitchen where he'd be pouring his 4th coffee in the evening from a machine that cost $8,000 and made a sound like a small, polite engine. And when they encountered each other, when Gloria and Edward occupied the same few square feet of the same building they both spent their lives in, Edward did not acknowledge her. Not rudely, not with a sneer or a dismissive gesture, or the deliberate cruelty of a person making a point. He simply didn't see her. She was furniture. She was infrastructure. She was part of the building, the way the air ducts were part of the building, or the elevators were part of the building. She was a thing that made the environment function, and like most things that make environments function, she was invisible precisely because she worked. That's the cruel paradox of maintenance. The better you do it, the less people notice. A clean floor is just a floor. A full soap dispenser is just a soap dispenser. Nobody walks into a spotless bathroom and thinks, "Someone did this. Someone's hands did this. Someone's back and knees and $11.60 an hour life made this possible." They just wash their hands and leave. Gloria understood this. She'd understood it for years. She didn't resent Edward for it. Not exactly. Resentment implies an expectation that was violated, and Gloria had no expectations when it came to men like Edward Kane. She'd cleaned for enough rich people to know that invisibility was the job, not the side effect. The job. You clean well, you stay quiet, you don't make eye contact unless spoken to. You exist in the margins of their world like a footnote nobody reads. That's the deal. She'd signed it a long time ago. But there was one night, about a year before the main event of this story, one night that stayed with Gloria, that she thought about more than she wanted to. It was a Thursday, late, maybe 11 p.m. Gloria was cleaning the main conference room, the big one, the one they called the Apex room, which had a table made of reclaimed walnut that seated 24 and a view of Lake Michigan that looked, at night, like a photograph of the void. Edward was in his office, door open. He'd been on calls all evening. Gloria could hear the low murmur of his voice through the walls, the way you hear a television in another room. Not the words, just the sound, the frequency of authority. She was emptying the trash under the conference table when she noticed something on the floor. A folder, dark blue. It had slid off the table, or been knocked off, or forgotten, and was lying face down on the carpet, half under a chair. Gloria picked it up, and she almost set it on the table and moved on. That's what the training said. That's what the contract said. That's what every instinct born of 20 years of cleaning corporate offices said. You don't read. You don't look. You don't engage with the contents of what you find. You pick it up, you put it back, you move on. But the folder had opened when it fell, and a sheet of paper had partially slid out. And Gloria, who was human, who had eyes, who was standing alone in a room at 11 at night with nothing to hear but the hum of a building being a building, Gloria glanced at it. She didn't understand most of what she saw. Charts, graphs, numbers with too many digits, acronyms that meant nothing to her, ROI, EBITDA, YOY, terms that existed in the financial dialect she had never been taught. But there was one line, one single line in the middle of the page, in the section that was highlighted in yellow, that she could read, because it was in plain English. It said, Client data migration to Atlas platform, target completion, March 15th. And below it, in red ink, someone had handwritten, vulnerability window, 48 hours. Exposure risk, critical. Gloria didn't know what Atlas was. She didn't know what a vulnerability window meant. She didn't know what critical exposure risk implied in the context of a $2.3 billion cybersecurity company. She was a cleaning woman. She cleaned things, but she could read. And the word critical, written in red ink by a hand that pressed hard enough to bend the paper, was not a word that required an MBA to understand. She put the folder on the table, finished the room, moved on. And for the next several months, she thought about that word, critical, the way you think about a sound you heard at night but couldn't identify. Not with alarm. With a low, persistent unease that sits behind your daily life like a shadow that doesn't quite match your shape. The day everything happened. It was a Wednesday in March. The 15th of March, actually. March 15th. If you were paying attention a minute ago, that date should feel familiar. Because March 15th was the target completion date for the client data migration to the Atlas platform. The date that was highlighted in yellow. The date next to the red ink note about the 48-hour vulnerability window. That date. Gloria arrived for her shift at 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, as always. She changed into her uniform in the basement locker room, pinned her ID badge to her chest, collected her cart, mop, bucket, vacuum, trash bags, the whole rolling arsenal of cleanliness, and took the service elevator to the 42nd floor. The floor was different tonight. She could feel it before she could articulate it. The energy was wrong. Normally by 6 p.m., the executive floor was winding down, the last analysts packing up, the assistants organizing for tomorrow, the slow exhale of a building releasing its human contents back into the city. But tonight, the floor was buzzing, not with the productive buzz of a busy day, with the panicked buzz of a hive that's been kicked. People were moving fast. Doors were opening and closing. Voices were sharp. She could hear Edward's voice from down the hall, not the low murmur she was used to, but something louder, harder, with an edge that cut through walls. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't need to know. She started cleaning. The East Wing first, as always. The smaller meeting rooms, the copy alcove, the kitchenette. She worked methodically. Vacuum first, surfaces second, trash third. The rhythm of routine. The steadiness of a woman who had learned that the world might be falling apart, but the floors still need to be clean. At 7:45, she reached the apex room. And here's where the geometry of the story begins to fold in on itself. The apex room was occupied. Edward was there. His CFO, a man named Dennis Park, was there. The head of cybersecurity, a woman named Sheila Vance, was there. Two people Gloria didn't recognize were there, wearing the particular expression of lawyers who are being paid very well to be very worried. And Rachel, Edward's assistant, was there, standing in the corner, holding a tablet, looking like a person watching a building burn from the inside. Gloria stood in the doorway with her cart. She'd been cleaning this room at this time for 7 years, every night, without exception. And tonight, for the first time in 7 years, someone was in her way. Edward saw her. Or rather, Edward's eyes registered her the way a driver's eyes register a road sign. Present, functional, irrelevant. Not now, he said. 2 words. Not cruel, not angry. Just the verbal equivalent of a closed door. Dismissive in the most fundamental sense. Not dismissing Gloria as a person, but dismissing her as a character. She was not now. She was later. She was not relevant to the crisis currently consuming this room. Gloria stepped back, pulled her cart into the hallway, moved on to the next room. But here's the thing about the apex room, and this is a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that you'd be forgiven for not catching it. The apex room had glass walls, floor to ceiling, transparent on all sides except the one facing Lake Michigan, which was solid glass but still transparent. The room was, by design, visible from almost every angle on the floor. It was built that way on purpose. Edward had insisted, during the original build-out, that the main conference room be transparent. "I don't believe in closed doors," he'd said in a magazine interview, which was a nice sentiment that completely contradicted everything about how he actually operated, but that's branding for you. The point is, Gloria could see into the room, and as she cleaned the hallway outside, moving slowly, because the hallway was long and the floor was marble, and marble requires specific attention, she could see what was happening on the other side of those glass walls. She could see Edward standing at the head of the table, both hands flat on the walnut surface, the way a man stands when the ground is shifting and he needs to feel something solid. She could see the lawyers leaning in, speaking urgently. She could see Sheila Vance, the cybersecurity head, with her laptop open, typing rapidly, her face a color that faces aren't supposed to be. And she could see the big screen at the far end of the room. The screen usually used for presentations and quarterly reviews, the kind of polished slide decks that make complicated things look simple. Tonight, the screen showed something different. It showed a clock, a countdown timer, red numbers on a black background, ticking backward, and even through the glass, even from 30 feet away, even with eyes that needed reading glasses she couldn't afford, Gloria could read the numbers. 47 hours, 12 minutes, 31 seconds, and counting down. She didn't know what the countdown meant, but she remembered the folder, the one from a year ago, the one that said 48 hours. Vulnerability window. Critical. Here's what was actually happening inside that room, though Gloria wouldn't learn the full details until much later. Kane Meridian was in the middle of the largest client data migration in the company's history. 340 corporate clients, banks, hospitals, government agencies, defense contractors, were having their security infrastructure moved from the company's legacy platform to a new system called Atlas. Atlas was supposed to be the future. 18 months of development, $40 million in R&D. Edward's personal obsession, his masterpiece, the thing that would cement his legacy and justify his $87,000 watch and prove to the board and the shareholders and the ghost of his ex-wife that he was still the smartest person in the room. But Atlas had a flaw, a critical vulnerability in the authentication layer, a gap in the code so subtle that the development team had missed it through 14 months of testing. The kind of bug that hides like a hairline fracture in a bridge support. You can't see it. You can't find it with standard inspections. You only discover it when the weight hits. And the weight was about to hit. Because a hacking collective, a sophisticated group that operated out of Eastern Europe and went by a name that Sheila Vance's team had been tracking for months, had found the flaw. They hadn't exploited it yet, but they'd sent a message. Encrypted. Anonymous. Delivered to Kane Meridian's general inbox at 3:47 that afternoon. The message said, "We have access to your Atlas authentication layer. In 48 hours, we will demonstrate this access publicly unless a payment of $75 million in cryptocurrency is received." This is not a negotiation. $75 million. The number sat in that room like a bomb. Not because Kane Meridian couldn't pay it. Technically, they could. But paying would be an admission. An admission that their flagship product, their 18-month, $40 million masterpiece, was compromised. And in cybersecurity, an admission of vulnerability is not just embarrassing. It's existential. Clients would flee. Stock would crash. Competitors would feast. The company that Edward Kane had spent 23 years building, brick by brick, patent by patent, handshake by handshake, would be gutted in a news cycle. So paying wasn't an option. But not paying wasn't an option either, because in 47 hours, 46 now, the clock was ticking. The hackers would demonstrate their access. They'd breach the system publicly. Client data would be exposed. 340 organizations, banks, hospitals, defense contractors. The fallout would be nuclear. And Edward who could read code like music, Edward who held 11 patents, Edward who was the smartest person in every room he'd ever entered, Edward was stuck. Because Sheila's team had been working on the vulnerability since 3:47 that afternoon, and they couldn't find it. They'd been through the code, line by line, module by module. They'd run every diagnostic, every scan, every penetration test in their arsenal, and the flaw was invisible. It was there. The hackers had proven it was there, but it was hidden so deep in the architecture watching the room through the glass. Not because she was nosy, not because she was scheming. She was watching the way you watch anything that's happening near you when you have nothing else to do and the world is giving you a show through a window. She saw the screen, the countdown. She saw the faces, the panic, and she saw something else. Something that nobody in that room saw because they were too busy looking at the clock and the code and each other. She saw the door, the physical, actual door of the apex room. It was closed, but it wasn't locked, and the keypad next to the door, the electronic access panel that controlled entry to the room, was blinking. Not the steady green of a secured door, not the solid red of a locked door. It was blinking, alternating, green, red, green, red. In 7 years of cleaning the 42nd floor, Gloria had never seen that keypad blink. It was always one or the other, green or red, open or locked. She'd noticed this the way she noticed everything on this floor, passively, without purpose, the way a person who spends 8 hours a night in the same space absorbs its rhythms and patterns the way a sailor absorbs the moods of the sea. And the blinking was wrong. It was a pattern that shouldn't exist, a heartbeat that didn't match the body. Gloria stood there, mop in hand, watching the keypad blink, and she thought about the folder. March 15, vulnerability window, critical, and she thought about her mother's words. How you do anything is how you do everything. And she thought about Marco, her grandson, 12 years old, doing his homework right now, probably, or not doing it, more likely, watching videos on his phone. The phone that Gloria had paid for by cleaning this floor for 7 years. And then Gloria did something that, by every rule she'd ever been given, every instinct she developed, every unwritten law of her invisible existence in this building, she was not supposed to do. She knocked on the glass. Not loudly, not urgently, a knock. 2 knuckles against the transparent wall of the apex room. Tap, tap, tap. The room didn't respond. They were too deep in crisis, too consumed by the clock. Gloria knocked again, louder. Rachel looked up, saw Gloria through the glass, frowned, walked to the door, opened it a few inches. Not now. We're in a meeting. I know. I'm sorry. But the door. Gloria, please. Not now. Gloria had been called by her name, which meant Rachel, at least, knew it. But the knowing was functional, not relational. The way you know the name of a street you drive on every day. It's there. It's useful. It's not personal. The keypad, Gloria said. On the door. It's blinking. Rachel glanced at the keypad. Looked back at Gloria. It does that sometimes. It's fine. It doesn't do that sometimes. I've been here 7 years. I've never seen it blink like that. Rachel's expression shifted. Not a lot. A degree. The way a compass needle moves when you bring a magnet close. I really can't deal with this right now. The blinking started at the same time as your meeting. It started when I got to this floor. It wasn't blinking before. I cleaned the east wing first. The keypads there are all solid green. This one is different. Something is different. Rachel stared at her, and for a moment, a brief, fragile moment, Rachel saw Gloria, not as furniture, not as infrastructure, as a person who had noticed something, a person who was standing in a hallway holding a mop and in the hardware. The access panels on the executive floor, installed 18 months ago as part of the Atlas integration, had a firmware conflict. When the system was under heavy traffic, like, say, the traffic generated by migrating 340 clients simultaneously, the firmware entered a loop state. The blinking green-red, green-red. And in that loop state, the panels weren't just malfunctioning cosmetically. They were broadcasting, sending authentication credentials in unencrypted bursts, like a radio tower accidentally transmitting on an open frequency. Every blink was a data leak. Every green-red, green-red was a packet of access credentials floating into the air, available to anyone with the right receiver within a 200-meter radius. The hackers hadn't broken in through the internet. They'd broken in through the walls. They were close, physically close, within range of the building, intercepting the credentials that the blinking keypads were hemorrhaging into the atmosphere like an open wound. And nobody, not Edward with his 11 patents, not Sheila with her cybersecurity team, not the lawyers, not the analysts, not the $40 million development team that built Atlas from the ground up, nobody had thought to look at the keypads. Because the keypads were physical infrastructure. They were part of the building. They were maintenance. They were the kind of thing you don't notice because they're always there, always working, always background. They were the technical hierarchy of Kane Meridian. They were cleaning. They were Gloria's domain, the invisible domain. Sheila ran back into the room. Gloria watched through the glass as Sheila said something to Edward. She watched Edward's face go through a sequence of expressions: confusion, disbelief, resistance, and then recognition. The specific recognition of a man realizing that the answer was standing in the hallway, holding a mop, and he'd told her, "Not now." Within 40 minutes, Sheila's team had isolated the firmware conflict. Within 2 hours, they disabled the compromised panels and switched to backup authentication. Within 6 hours, they traced the hacking collective to a van, a literal van, parked in a garage 3 blocks from the Kane Meridian building, running a receiver array that had been intercepting panel broadcasts for weeks. The FBI was called. The van was seized. The hackers were arrested. All 4 of them, in a van, 3 blocks away. The countdown timer went dark. The crisis was over. And the company, $2.3 billion, 2,300 employees, 340 clients, 23 years of Edward Kane's life, was saved by a woman who made $11.60 an hour, who cleaned toilets and emptied trash and polished glass walls that people went through without seeing, who noticed a blinking light because she'd spent 7 years paying attention to a floor that nobody else paid attention to, who knocked on a door she wasn't supposed to knock on and said something she wasn't supposed to say and refused to go away when Rachel told her, "Not now." Gloria Moreno saved Kane Meridian Technologies with a mop in her hand and a pattern in her eye and the stubborn, quiet dignity of a woman whose mother taught her that how you do anything is how you do everything. Here's where most people would end this story. The cleaning lady saves the day. The billionaire learns his lesson. Cue the slow music and the moral about some invisible people. But this story doesn't end there, because what happened next is the part that actually matters. And it's the part that nobody expected, including me. 2 days after the crisis, Edward Kane asked Rachel to bring Gloria to his office. Not the Apex room, his personal office. The corner office on the 42nd floor with a view of the lake, and the desk made of something that probably used to be a tree in a forest that no longer exists. Gloria arrived in her uniform. She'd just started her shift. She still had her cart in the hallway. She'd never been in Edward's office before. She'd cleaned it thousands of times, but never while he was in it. The room was different with a person in it. Smaller, somehow. More real. Edward was standing behind his desk, and he looked different. Not smaller. Not humble. Edward Kane was constitutionally incapable of looking humble. But something in the architecture of his face had shifted. Something structural. Like a building that's still standing, but you can tell the foundation moved. "Please sit down," he said. Gloria sat in a leather chair that was probably worth more than 3 months of her salary. It was extremely comfortable. She hated that she noticed. "I owe you an apology," Edward said. Gloria said nothing. She'd learned a long time ago that when powerful people apologize, you let them do it at their own pace. Rushing them is like rushing a large animal. Unpredictable results. I've worked in this building for 11 years. You've cleaned my floor for 7. And until 2 days ago, I didn't know your name. He paused. I want you to understand that I'm not saying that to perform regret. I'm saying it because it's a fact, and facts should be stated clearly. And the fact that I didn't know the name of the woman who cleaned my office every night for 7 years it's a fact that says something about me that I don't like. Gloria looked at him, studied him, took her time. "What does it say?" she asked. Edward looked surprised. Not by the question, by the fact that she asked it. He'd expected her to accept the apology and move on. He'd expected the interaction to follow the same asymmetric pattern that every interaction between Edward and the world followed. He speaks, they receive. But Gloria was asking him to go deeper. And Edward, to his credit, to the last remaining credit of a man who had spent 2 decades treating half the people in his life as infrastructure, went deeper. "It says that I built a system where the people who keep things running are invisible. And then I wondered why I couldn't see the problem." Gloria nodded. Slowly. "Yes," she said. "It does say that. Not agreeing to be polite. Agreeing because it's true. And because a woman who makes $11.60 an hour doesn't have the luxury of telling comfortable lies to people who need uncomfortable truths. I'd like to compensate you," Edward said, "for what you did. The board has approved a recognition bonus of $250,000. Gloria's hands tightened on the arms of the leather chair. $250,000. More money than she'd made in the last 10 years combined. More money than the car repair, and the phone bill, and Marco's school supplies, and the rent, and the bus fare, and every dollar she'd ever sent her daughter for commissary, and every dollar she'd ever spent on medication for her hands, and every dollar she'd ever counted on a kitchen table at midnight, trying to make the math come out different than it always did. $250,000. That's very generous," Gloria said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "It's not generous," Edward said. "It's appropriate. You identified a vulnerability that my entire security team missed. You saved this company from a catastrophic breach. The value of what you did is incalculable. 250,000 is, if anything, insufficient." Gloria looked at him, and something in her face, something quiet, something old, something inherited from a mother who polished mirrors until they looked like holes in the wall, settled into an expression that Edward had never seen directed at him before. It was not gratitude. It was not awe. It was not the look of a person being rescued by someone more powerful. It was pity, just a cane," Gloria said. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I didn't save your company because I'm smart. I'm not a technology person. I don't know what Atlas is. I don't know what firmware means. I couldn't find a vulnerability in a computer system if you gave me a year and a textbook." Edward frowned. "Then how?" "I saved your company because I pay attention. I pay attention to the floor I clean. I pay attention to the lights and the sounds and the patterns. I notice when a soap dispenser is running low. I notice when a chair has been moved. I notice when a keypad that has been green for 7 years starts blinking. That's not brilliance. That's not a skill you put on a resume. That's what happens when you spend every day of your life in a place and you actually care about that place, even though it's not yours, even though nobody notices, even though the man whose name is on the building walks past you like you're part of the wallpaper." She paused. "Let the words sit. You want to know what the real vulnerability was? It wasn't the firmware. It wasn't the keypads. It wasn't even the hackers in the van. The real vulnerability was that you built a company where the people closest to the ground are the people farthest from the conversation. The people who see the most are the people who are heard the least. You have 2,300 employees, and I guarantee you that there are people on every floor of this building who notice things that your analysts and your executives and your board of directors will never see. Because those people are invisible. Way invisible. And you can hand me a check for $250,000, and that's wonderful, and I'll take it, and it'll change my life, and my grandson's life, and maybe my daughter's life when she comes home. But if you write that check and then go back to walking past the next lawyer without seeing her, then you haven't learned anything. You've just paid for a lesson you refused to take." Edward Kane sat down in his own chair, behind his own desk, in his own building, and for the first time in a very long time, maybe for the first time ever, he didn't have a response. He didn't have a strategy. He didn't have a next step. He just had the words of a cleaning woman ringing in his ears like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Gloria stood up. "Thank you for the bonus. I'd like to get back to work now. The East Wing bathrooms won't clean themselves." She walked out. Edward sat there for a long time. A very long time. And then he called Rachel. And he said something that Rachel later told her husband was the most shocking thing Edward Kane had ever said in 11 years of work. He said, "I want a meeting with every night shift maintenance worker in this building. Not a memo, not a survey, a meeting. I want to sit in a room with them, and I want to ask them what they see. And I want to listen." The meeting happened the following week. 14 maintenance workers. Night shift. In the Apex room. At a walnut table that seated 24. Edward sat. Not at the head. In the middle. And he listened. For 3 hours. And the things they told him, the things they'd noticed, the patterns they'd observed, the small, quiet, invisible observations of people who spent every night inside the bones of a building that nobody else saw after dark. Those things led to 11 operational changes in the first month. 11, including an HVAC inefficiency on the 28th floor that was costing the company $84,000 a year, including a water leak behind a wall on the 16th floor that would have caused structural damage within 6 months, including, this one kept Edward up at night, the second firmware issue in the parking garage access system that Sheila's team found only because a maintenance worker named Carlos mentioned that the garage gates had been acting weird on Thursdays. Weird on Thursdays. the observation. 3 words from a man who made $12 an hour. And it led to the discovery of a scheduled exploit that would have given the same hacking collective access to the building's physical security grid. Carlos made $12 an hour. His observation was worth approximately $400 million in prevented liability. Edward created a program. He called it Ground Level. Every quarter, maintenance staff from all 9 Kane Meridian locations sat down with floor managers and security teams and shared what they noticed. Not what they'd been asked to notice. What they'd actually noticed. The things that fell between the cracks of protocol. The things that only people who spend their lives close to the ground can see. The program cost the company $220,000 a year to run. In its first year, it identified 37 issues. 9 were critical. The estimated savings in prevented damage, avoided breaches, and operational efficiency was north of $12 million. $12 million. From the people who emptied the trash. Gloria got her bonus. She paid off debts. She fixed her car. She put money aside for Marco's education. She kept cleaning. Same floor. Same shift. Same routine. But not the same. Because now, when Gloria walked onto the 42nd floor, Edward came. If he was there, if he was working late, if their paths crossed in the hallway, or the kitchen, or the conference room with a glass wall, Edward Kane looked at her. Not through her, at her. And he said her name. Good evening, Gloria. 3 words. That's all. But after 7 years of silence, 3 words might as well be a cathedral. Gloria would nod. Good evening, Mr. Kane. And she'd keep moving, keep cleaning, keep doing the things she'd always done, paying attention to a world that had only recently started paying attention back. But here's the real twist. The one that I've been holding until now. The one that changes everything. The program, Ground Level, became, over the next 2 years, one of Kane Meridian's most talked about innovations. It was written up in Harvard Business Review. It was cited in 3 management textbooks. Edward gave a talk about it at a conference. A talk about listening to people closest to operations, about the intelligence that lives in the invisible workforce, about the billion-dollar blind spot of executive isolation. And in that talk, in front of 400 people, Edward told the story of Gloria. He told it well. He told it with genuine emotion. He credited her by name. He said she saved the company. And the audience applauded. And afterward, people came up to Edward and shook his hand and said things like, "What a powerful story," and "That must have been a real wake-up call." And Edward smiled and accepted the praise and felt, genuinely, that he had learned the lesson, that he had changed, that the story of Gloria had made him a better leader, a better person, a better seer of the invisible. And maybe it had. But here's what Edward didn't say in that talk. Here's what he didn't know. Because Gloria never told him. Gloria Moreno's mother, the woman who cleaned houses for 31 years, the woman who could make a mirror look like a hole in the wall, the woman who said how you do anything is how you do everything. Gloria's mother had worked in this building. Not this exact building, but the building that stood here before. The old office tower that was demolished in 2001 to make way for the Kane Meridian headquarters. Gloria's mother had cleaned that building for 16 years. 16 years in the same location. Different building, different owners, different tenants, but the same corner, the same intersection, the same piece of ground. And when the old building was demolished and Kane Meridian went up in its place, Gloria's mother was let go. you do anything is how you do everything. Gloria applied to clean the new building. The building that stood on the ground her mother had cleaned for 16 years. She got the job. Night shift, $11.60 an hour. And for 7 years, she cleaned the 42nd floor of a tower that was built on the demolished bones of a building her mother had given 16 years of her life to. And she never told anyone. Not Edward, not Rachel, not Pauline in HR. Nobody. Because it wasn't their business. It was hers. It was between her and her mother and the ground they both knelt on. And when she noticed that blinking keypad, when she saw the pattern that nobody else saw, when she knocked on the glass and refused to go away, she wasn't just saving a company. She was honoring a woman who spent her whole life paying attention to places that didn't pay attention back. She was proving that her mother's life, 31 years of cleaning, 16 years in one building, arthritic hands, and $6,000 in savings, and a final paycheck delivered in a form letter. She was proving that her mother's life mattered, that the attention her mother gave was not wasted, that the patterns her mother noticed were not meaningless, that the invisible life of a cleaning woman, any cleaning woman, every cleaning woman, has value that no check can quantify and no speech at a conference can fully articulate, and no billionaire, no matter how reformed, can ever truly comprehend. Because Edward Kane learned to see Gloria. And that's good. That's progress. That's real. But Gloria was never invisible. She was always there. Always paying attention. Always noticing. Always caring about a place that didn't care back. For 7 years. Just like her mother. For 16. The blindness was never Gloria's problem. It was always Edward's. And the twist, the real twist, the one that should keep you up tonight, is this. How many Glorias are in your building? How many people are cleaning your floor, driving your bus, stocking your shelves, cooking your food, watching your children? People who notice things, who care about things, who pay attention to the invisible machinery of your daily life, and you have never once asked their name. Not because you're cruel, not because you're a bad person, but because the system, the same system that made Edward Kane a billionaire and Gloria Moreno invisible, that system taught you that some people are the wallpaper and some people are the painting. And you believed it. We all believed it. But the wallpaper holds up the room. And sometimes on a Wednesday night in March, with a clock counting down and a company on the edge of collapse, the wallpaper is the only thing that can see the crack in the wall. Pay attention to the people who pay attention. Learn their names. Ask what they see. Because the next Gloria is already in the building. She's already noticed the blinking light. She's already standing in the hallway, holding a mop, waiting for someone, anyone, to look through the glass and see her. And if you don't, the 48-hour clock is already ticking, and you don't even know